that I was formerly a Fitch, and I grew up in Cornish with my two brothers, Jim and Bud, and two foster sisters, Velma Lord, who lives on Center Road, and Sylvia Abbott, who is deceased now, but she was sister of Charlie and George Abbott, who grew up with Jeffrey Stone. And I live in the house I grew up in, but my brother Jim and his wife Sue and their son Corey and the little boys that we hear back there, and the little boys there, Hudson and Hayden, are the 10th generation to live in that house. That's just amazing. So we're definitely the oldest family in Cornish, and I did some research trying to find out how many families in New Hampshire have been in the family, farms have been in the family for over 200 years, and I don't think it's ever been really researched, but I did find there's at least 3. The Beaver Pond Farm in going to Newport, and then this one up in Milford, New Hampshire, up in the White Mountains, that's turned theirs into a museum. So because it's so rare, that's why we were asked to come and talk to you about the farm, about the family, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we came into Cornish, and then Jim's going to talk to you about why we stayed and some of the lifestyle and the tools. And then Corey and Deanna are going to come up and tell you about the future of the farm, because it is continuing as a farm. So my story starts with 2 men. They both came over from England in the 1600s. The first one is William Brewster. He was the oldest man on the Mayflower. He was the most religious, and he was probably really looked up to, since most people were leaving England for religious reasons. So he came over with 6 children and his wife Sarah. We are descendants of his son Jonathan, and accidentally my daughter-in-law is descendant of his daughter Mary. The other guy is James Fitch. Now remember that name, it's going to come up again. He came over in 1600s too, and he helped to found Norwich and Lebanon, Connecticut, and he was also the first minister of Saybrook, Connecticut. He became friends, he learned the Indian language and became friends with the Mohegans, the Incas, and the Picos, Mark, am I pronouncing that right? Pequot? Okay, anyway, he convinced them to side with the English during the King Philip's War, which was the first war with the English and the Indians. So so they had 14 children, and his son Sam, he actually had 2 wives, but between them he had 14 children. And then his son Samuel married Mary Brewster, who was the great-granddaughter of William Brewster. And then their son James is the one that moved to Cornish about 1771. That was when the deed was written. We don't know exactly when he came up, but they built a log house in back of the present house, and the deed was into his oldest son, who was in his 30s then, Hezekiah. And Hezekiah built the house that's staying there now. But for some reason, about 3 years after he built it, he sold it to his brother Samuel. Now imagine, because he was tired of all the rocks and the hills, and he went to Claremont where it was nice and flat. So you can't blame him there. Just incidentally, if anyone knows Kay McClay and Shelley Brooklands, they're both descendants from Hezekiah. So Sam married Thankful Royce, which is a common name, and they had 11 children. And then the oldest, most of the time it did go down to the oldest son. Their oldest son, James, married Bethina Bartlett, which is a familiar name on Dingleton Hill. They had 3 children. 2 of them died very young, and they just had one son named Chester. He married Amy Westgate, and she was a cousin of Martha Quimby, who lived in my house. And Martha Quimby is Peggy Ogilvy's great-grandmother. They had 4 children, the oldest one being James. But he was kind of he left town with left his wife and children and took the Grange money and went west, and no one saw him. But his brother Alfred stayed on the farm. He married Ida Williams from Plainfield, and they had 4 children. His oldest one was James. And his father, when James was 18, his father died of cancer. James had to quit school early because his father was getting sick and run the farm. But he and his mother not only ran the farm, but they also put 3 siblings through college. That was amazing. So then when James was 30, he married the minister's daughter, Grace, and they had 7 children. My dad, Orville, was the oldest, and he married a friend of his sister Bernice, which most of us know, when he was about 27. And then they bought the house next door where I live in. And they bought it from Martha Quimby, Peggy's great-grandmother, because she wanted someone to farm it, and her only son was a talented musician, and he had moved in other parts of the world. So they bought the house, though, for $3,000. Like 100 acres in this big house. It was the same amount of price that Martha's grandparents had bought it for about 8 years before. You know, land just wasn't worth that much back then. So my grandfather wasn't a really strong man, so my father, as soon as he was strong enough, he ran the farm. So when he got married, he continued milking the cows, and eventually he wanted to bring the cows down to his barn, but he had to fix it up because it wasn't a cow barn. And so he needed more money, and to do that he needed more land. So his parents just said, take our farm, and they could live there the rest of their lives. And that's how my father got 2 farms, even though he had 6 siblings. So in the early 20s, they gave the land to my brothers and myself, and we paid taxes on it for a while. But then when Jim and Sue got married and wanted to live there, we passed it on to them. And we still do own the Eastwoods, which is in back of Donnie Dunn's. It's like 80 acres, and that's being preserved. So that's how we got here. And now Jim will tell you about why we stayed and how we live.
Thank you for coming. A lot of people came a long way. Appreciate it. I'm going to talk about a few things. First of all, I want to talk about the meals at Daisy's. Daisy contacted us last fall about this thing, and I was like, all right. And so we had 3 meals there. We were over 3 hours with each meal reminiscing about old times. Of course, she served a little wine and beer to help keep the conversation going. And it was really fun. And I learned a lot from Mike and Daisy about, because they're a little bit older than we are, so they were farming with our families earlier than my memory. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot about how those farmers work together and how they borrowed equipment back and forth. It was a fun time. And also Daisy babysat actually for us. The families were really close and always knew what the other one was doing. And Mike was around for the transition from horse to tractor. So he had some good horse stories. And that I missed because I wasn't born till 52. They had a lot of, we talked about how the families worked together, the farms, so they didn't, they always had help. And I think that was happening in that time. And I've been looking at journals, and I think that maybe before the 40s, there were a lot of hired men around, and the family always had hired men. There was no talk in the journals about working with other farms. It was always different hired men. There was Tom and Joe Scruton, who I know lived right down the road, and another one that was Pete Daniels. Does that name ring a bell? There's a Pete Daniels Road in town. And that's about all I know about Pete Daniels, other than I see his name show up here as a hired man. So it was interesting to me that my memory of farms working together was kind of a new concept. And I don't know if there just weren't as much hired help, or whether it got more expensive to hire them. There's a whole bunch of unknowns. But it was interesting that here we are, a farm with 10 cows, and they could hire, often 2 hired men came every day. If they didn't come, it was noted in the journal, Joe didn't show up today. So they were there most every day. They were raising kids, they were putting people through school, they just seemed to be doing really well. You never saw any complaints about being low on money, and they bought new equipment, they bought and sold cows, they're very active. So the journals are, there's there's two of these, well actually three journals. This is what we call a little black book. And this has been written in since before the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather Chester started to write this book. And it started out talking about buying a pair of shoes and jeans and stuff. But then as the years went on, we've added any major things that happened to the house, whether it's my grandmother wallpapered the living room this year, or often it'll go a year or two with nothing written in it. When we put the pond in, we added that, and there's only 4 pages left in the book, so. So we refer to this, we keep it really handy, really small print.
Is it written in pencil, probably?
Oh yeah, it's hard to read, yeah. Has to be, typewriter didn't work good in the day. So why are we where we are? We're on a piece of land that's steep, it's rocky, it's headed toward the northwest, the wind blows 300 days a year. Anybody that's walked up over Dingleton Hill, it's all kind of nice on the south side. You reach the peak where you can look into Vermont, and the wind is blowing, and it's just a whole different place there than it is most places. And they weren't interested in the view. They built a house. There's no windows exposed to the view. That wasn't what they were after. So why we ever got it? The only thing I can think of is the Chases didn't like the Fitches. The Chases were the one that had control over the properties in town. And so they would, I think, decide where people were going to farm. Because I don't think my family would have chose that spot. So it was 100 acres, and the Chases said, give that to them Fitches, they'll be headed back to Connecticut in just a few months. We're still there. The Chases are all gone, except they all got done farming in the late 1800s. They saved all the bottom land from Claremont to Plainfield so they could be farmers and be real productive. They didn't last very long. I guess there were a few relatives around a little bit, but they were done farming by the end of the 1800s. So I don't really have a good reason why we're where we are. And then and so there's a few reasons we didn't leave, and one is sheep, and one is the Civil War. So in 1810 there was a Jarvis over in Ascutney brought sheep into the area. And that was a really moneymaker thing for about 40 years. And most farms started farming with doing sheep, getting the wool, taking advantage of that. And I don't find anything in these journals that talk about sheep. There's no sheep equipment around. I haven't heard any stories about. I don't think we did that. I think our farm did not go to the sheep. We kept milking cows and staying with the dairy. And so when the sheep business went out, mostly before the Civil War, they got a little bit more in the Civil War because they're making clothes for the soldiers. When the sheep business went out, it wasn't a big deal because we weren't doing sheep anyway. And my great-grandfather, Martha mentioned, Alfred, born in 1861. So he was a little young to go to the war. And his father was 44 years old. And I think probably could have gone to war, but we know he didn't go to the war because he was writing in this little black book. And so nobody went to the war. And you hear stories of this farm boys going to Pennsylvania, Ohio, all this nice farming country, and either not come home or come home and take their siblings, their brothers, and they all go where they got 6 feet of topsoil instead of 6 inches. By the time the sheep got done, the soil was pretty depleted, and the farming was not. There was a lot of issues around the whole farming thing going on. So those are the two of the reasons why I think that we were able to survive is because we didn't get into those two patterns. And so then I wanted to kind of hit on the Cornish colony and how it affected my family. I was just moving some barrows the other day, and the back of a barrel, if I can get this picture to come up, there was a little piece of paper, and on it said, "This barrel, commode, stand, in bed that matched likely were bought in 1903 when Ida Fitch kept men boarders who built Mrs. Slade's house, now owned by Walter and Harriet Jenks. So they made money from the colony people. That was one way they made it. They boarded helpers. I'm assuming if she bought a bed, they would probably stay for a couple of years and some income. They also sold them vegetables and maple syrup, and they were real friendly to them. Annetta St. Gaudens lived nearby, and she was Augustus's brother's wife. And this all through these journals is talk about the Mrs. St. Gaudens and Paul. She had a son, Paul. Augustus's brother had died pretty early, so those two were living in the house near with John Dreifeld. Is John here?
Yep.
Okay, they were living in the house that before John owned it. So my family was real connected. They would get together. There's one place where it said Mrs. St. Gaudens came for ice cream on a Sunday afternoon, and they were going. And by the 1920s, they had a car, so they would actually go for rides. Went around the mountain with Mrs. St. Gaudens and Mrs. Barrett today. The Barretts from the Glass House. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them. That's another family close by. And there was endless places where they get together socializing and just helping each other out, doing different things. And my family sold them wood. They brought their ice. Everybody had to have ice. And they would fill their barns and silos with hay if they had a cow or two. And so I think the colony people really made it possible for my family to stay because they had money, which was pretty rare in those days. In fact, my family still had all their hired men, and they would hire them to do stuff for the colony people. So that all really helped out with that. So that's kind of what I've got for why we're here. It's not a lot, but it's all I could come up with. It doesn't really make any sense for us to be here. and it is a nice place to live, and it's an honor to be in Cornish, and so glad to be able to have family keep it going. But there's a lot of unanswered questions. So we're gonna start talking about pain. So we brought a bunch of tools, and I'm going to talk about some of them. One of my favorite tools is this one right here. And this is a snap with a blade. It's actually a 2-speed. It's one notch here and one notch here, and then the way you put that out, and then I'll show you. Try to get somewhere I don't touch somebody. Hopefully get it on right. Let me get out a little more space.
You want to connect your hand?
Oh, I should be able to do this. I've done it 100 times. So this
When was the first time you used that?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, that story's coming. So this is one notch, and if you move this down, it comes in a little closer, and that's where I'm using speed 1 guy. I don't think I've ever used it in the wide open range. It would take some pretty nice grass, and mostly what I've mowed has been some of the less desirable. If it's really good grass, I mow it with a tractor. And so I mostly end up doing the side work and side hills and small areas. So it's those 2 pieces, the handle, the head. So my first experience with the side was when I was in my 20s. I was I got a job mowing the lawn at the Cornish school. They put in a new lawn before the gym was there. They put in a new lawn, and the grass was so thick they couldn't mow it with their lawnmower. They didn't get to it. So I got a call, probably from Daisy and Michael's dad, to see if I could get down and mow this grass. So I went down there, and I'm trying to get it. I didn't really know how to And I'm trying to get that grass mowed, and Stanley Colby came along. I'm assuming that their dad probably sent him over there. I don't know what I'm talking about. And Stanley said, "Stand up like you're proud to run that thing." And Stanley Colby and Jesse Stone were the two siders in town. They'd go to the farm barrel picnics and they'd win prizes and all that. So Stanley knew how to do it. And he gave me a whole bunch of pointers: stand up, learn the swing. And I actually went to his house a bunch of times after that with swing sides together. He was a county agent, so I knew him pretty well. He moved into the White Swan farm. One of the tricks with the side is getting it sharp. And this is my favorite side. This has got a cherry handle. It's fairly light. This blade has been used so much, I don't know if you can see, but it's one inch through from sharpening it. This place right there, it's still the best runner. So I've got some stones there somewhere. So if you're going to use a side and hadn't used it for a while, you put it on one of those big wheels, crank it with your foot and kind of grind on it for a while. And then when you get close, you have two stones. You kind of hold it. How to get it all lined up. Work your way down. I'd spend more time if I didn't have so many people watching. And then you use a finer stone. And this is one so thin that I'm afraid it's going to break any minute. And that's kind of wet. And when that thing is sharp and the grass is nice timothy in the morning, best to mow when the grass is wet. And go out in the morning, 6 o'clock, the sun's just coming up, the dew's thick, it's quiet. Life is really good. The grass is all laid right now. So isn't it pretty? Angling, it's got so many lines. I just think this is the best one. And I brought another one. We've probably got a dozen sides up there in the farm. And I brought another one that just for comparison. I don't have my nail to hang it on. So this one here, if anybody can tell the difference, there's a whole bunch of problems. This curve has gone out of it. It's an ash. It weighs half again as much as that cherry handle. Probably made in Plainfield. They had a size knot factory in Plainfield. And this blade, which is a brush blade, they call it, pretty much useless. I can't find a reason you'd have a cut brush the size. And interestingly, this blade has never been sharpened. If you look at it careful, nobody's ever used this blade. It's been sitting around for probably 100 years. Not 100, but sitting around a long time. Uncomfortable. Doesn't, I don't know. It's just no fun. Not what I want to do, but I keep it around for a special purpose. This one has 3 notches, so it's really a 3-speed side. And I keep this around. I haven't had anybody come by to want to borrow a side for a while. But if you did come by, I've got a good one for you.
The old weed whackers.
Yeah, those weed whackers, they get pretty good. I fought them for a long time. I wouldn't use them because I use the sides, and boy, they're getting better, and I end up using them more than I want to. So after you get the hay mowed with your scythe, you're going to collect hay. And there's a few ways of doing that. And one is pitchfork. You need to have a rake. I couldn't find the rake. There's a rake about that wide that wouldn't you could sit down.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find it. I didn't play water.
A lot of berries going on. I saw your grandfather use one of those rakes
Yeah.
up in that field.
Yeah. They were pretty common. So I couldn't find my pitchfork either. This is a pitchfork, but it's not shiny. Mine, the one I use every day, is all shiny and it's a shorter handle. And I don't know where it went. It was there yesterday and I went to pick it up and it's right there somewhere. So you have to make hay when the sun shines. That's what the old people say. You keep your load wide, keep your eye in the sky, and make sure it's dry when you put it away. That comes from a song from Maine. piece of a song from a songwriter from Maine. What's his name? David Mallett. There you go. My most exciting time with a fork was when I was probably in my 20s. And I only had a couple, I was milking a cow, maybe had a calf or two, and we were getting hay loose. Just because I thought it was fun, I guess. And my dad helped out, and he did a lot of loose hay. And he would go out in the field, and we'd have probably winter on it with him, rotary race, but he'd be able to take those, pick up just the right amount of hay, put it on the wagon, and he had a pattern where those little bunches of hay would go on the wagon, and he had done that 1,000 times. Did it well. So every piece went on there, he knew where it went, what order they all went in, and we got back to the barn, he took the same pieces off in the opposite order. And those pieces stayed together. You know, if somebody in the barn, if there were a bunch of guys doing what they were doing, somebody would know where to put that in the barn, so when they came back in the winter, they could grab just what is comfortable for the pitchfork and take it down south. And that's the only time he did it. I was very impressed. It's really neat to see somebody, and there's nobody that knows how to do that now. But Fred, did you do loose hay?
What?
Did you do loose hay?
Oh, yes.
So you know what this is. So I got to pick on Billy Sharp a little bit. I saw this. So this is not a pitchfork. This is a pitchfork used for manure. Billy was doing a movie over it. Where is he? I gotta watch it. Okay. Billy was doing a movie over at Newbold, making a movie. I knew that was happening. I helped him a little bit with it. He called up all in panic. You got a pitchfork? And they were starting, they had all the actors there, and it was a pretty big production. And he had one of those for a pitchfork. And somebody knew that wasn't right. They couldn't have a movie with that for a pitchfork. So he called them in a panic looking for a pitchfork. But if you try to move hay, it just doesn't work. It's only in one extra time, or two extra times. And if you try to move hay with that, it just ain't gonna work. And if you try to use manure with this, that's important. These tools are made for a certain purpose, and if you try to vary from that, you get in trouble. So I've got some other stuff. This sickle, and my grandfather used this a lot, but it's more of a bend over. And I got a couple problems. First of all, I'm left-handed. If you turn it upside down, it's not going to work good. It doesn't work good for me, right-handed. So I use it to cut bales open, stringer bale, whack, whack, cut the string. I can do that with it going backwards. So let's see, what else we got?
What is that supposed to be used for?
The sickle?
Yeah.
You could cut grass up close to something, or maybe some weeds. He used to use it around his blackberry bushes where you couldn't get in there with his eyes, and kind of a quick little thing to, and that too you have to keep sharp or it's pretty frustrating. Daisy brought one too. This is kind of a different style. This one has a little leather
Cord knife.
a cord.
Corn with that?
Oh, a corn knife. Okay. So you could cut corn with this too, I suppose. This will work better?
Oh, yeah, we use those down at Littell's.
Okay. You were cutting corn by hand? I just broke your leather, sorry. And then you loaded it onto the wagon?
Yep.
See, that was before my time. We had a chopper.
Carted the bunches up to your silo
Yeah.
and fed it into the chopper there.
Okay. Yeah, by the time we came along, my memory came along, your dad had bought a wagon that we blew it into the wagon.
Yeah, well, that was a little later.
Yeah, a little later.
We'd ride on top of it, stack the corn on the wagon, and then kids would get up on the wagon to ride back to
Sure.
where they chopped it and blew it into the silo.
That was the fun part, right?
Yeah.
We also had later had a binder.
Oh,
And it would go down the row and bind it into a bunch.
yep.
And
That's what Jesse Stone did for a long time.
that did away with that.
Yep. Yep. I've never got involved in that. I was born too late. I'm lucky. Yeah. So also, a big thing happened on the farms when the hired men were working. They had extra people around, and then I'm going to read one little thing out of the Black Book, which is important. Okay, this is May 1950. John Deere tractor, plow, mower, harrow. That's all it says. It doesn't say if they bought it or sold it, or it doesn't say anything. But I'm assuming that's when they bought the first tractor. And so with that came the end of the hired man, and it came the end of mowing the stone walls. And Kevin Gardner, the stone wall guy, talked about how if you got a square corner and you're trying to mow it with a tractor or even a horse, you can't get the cutter bar in there. So you've got a little circle that you can't mow unless you've got your hired man to come clean up after you. So when that stopped happening, and it's hard to get close to the stone walls, so from that point on, the fields all get smaller. And the stone walls move back further in the woods. A tree grows, puts a limb out, and then you can't even get that close, so you set over a little more. Pretty soon you got 40 feet, you're not farming. And it was interesting. Sue and I were walking down at the Scotty View Farm down near Claremont. Last winter we walked around the big field. We were thinking about doing sleigh rides there, but we just spent an hour walking around. No stone walls, of course, because there's no stones. But the fence line, still, there was 15 to 20 feet of trees where they'd kept setting over. Even though, several acres of land was not being used because they hadn't cleaned that up. And I think now the McNamara's own it, they'll get to that. They'll clean that all up. But the land, apparently they didn't need all the land because they didn't work on keeping it all. They just did what was easy. And I always blamed it on stone walls, but there weren't any walls there. There was just a fence. Seems like that would have been easier. Let's see. So Lionel Tracy, anybody know Lionel Tracy? He's a character. He'd wear a hat like that. He always kept it nice. Bib overalls. He was relative to Stu's, wherever he went. And a pack of cigarettes in his pocket. The other pocket he had chocolate mint things. He always unwrap them, take a little bite, put the rest back. Peppermint patties. Kept a little black book about like that, and he could tell you every gallon of maple syrup. He had everything written from way back into the 20s. Ask him a question and he'd dig it up. But he was a side man. Holy smokes. And he worked in New Bolts. He was their hired man. So he would work those stone walls, and he'd stand there. It looked like nothing was getting done because he'd stand there smoking a cigarette. At the end of the day, he'd have a stone wall cleaned right up. All that little tiny wiregrass. Never hear a scythe hit a stone. Just steady. And his scythe was always sharp, and he never complained, never broke a sweat. I don't think he ever hurt a muscle. He was just the right type of guy to have working for you. And a real character, sense of humor. As a kid, he'd have me just belly laughing. Oh, man. He didn't miss a trick. So I just wanted to mention his name because one of my heroes is gone now. But
He always came to town meeting in a shirt and tie. I always remembered that.
Yep.
It was so formal, and we don't do that anymore.
Right, yeah. Old school.
And he'd count cars.
Count cars, yeah.
See how slow he could go and how many cars. I would recommend that.
You mean playing cards?
No, when he went to town, he would drive slow and see how many cars.
Oh.
You pile up like
He did a lot of work for his sister Priscilla, of course, Stuart's mother and my mother-in-law. And
So I guess that's enough on haying. Let's turn to wood. So there's a lot of things that go on the farm. Hay in the summer and wood in the winter was kind of the biggest things. Also made ice. A lot in the journals. 4 loads of ice today. And they took ice to the colony people, like I said, in sawdust. 2 loads of sawdust to Mrs. St. Gaudens. And I don't know where they got their ice. I think later on probably out of Blow-Me-Down Pond.
Yeah.
There was another name of a pond I saw in the book, and I'd never seen that, and I tried to go back to it, and I couldn't find it again.
They didn't get any from the Connecticut?
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
Still water.
They needed good solid ice. That would be from a lake or a... And they have these chunks, you know, they'd cut them. They had different types of saws, make squares, and then they'd pick them up, put them on their wagon, and take them home and put them in there. And that happened. I just read in there where in 1943 it said wiring the house for electricity. And I think the electricity came to our house in 1944. And the ice box they used is still in the woods. Not much of it's left. But when they got done with the ice box, they threw it. A lot of that stuff, when they get done with it, it was time to move on to more wonderful things. And they threw them away. So ice was a big deal. I had to borrow this from Martha. She didn't know I borrowed it because there's no ice equipment around our house anymore. I don't know. Probably an antique dealers found it when it was valuable.
Did you find your ice house?
I know where the ice house was. Yeah, that got torn down in the late 40s.
Oh, it
And
came down? you said?
they took it down. There was an old shed. There's some pictures of it kind of hanging. So if you're going to go in the woods and cut wood, back in the day, this is probably the kind of saw. I saw my grandfather use this saw right here. Turnbuckle, a piece of wood that's squeezed in there, and a blade. Simple. I actually don't think I've ever sawed wood with this, and again, if I'm left-handed, I guess it would work, but most of these tools are made for right-handed people. And I think you held it about like that, and they would saw wood. Keep them super sharp. A few passes you'd go through an 8 or 10 inch piece. This blade here I think came from the hardware store in Windsor. This is not the original blade. The original blade would have just had smaller teeth that you could sharpen every night and make sure it's really sharp. Because if you're going to be out there doing that, you want to get a lot done. You need to have a sharp blade. My grandfather actually used had a bow saw, a metal bow saw. He probably used more than that. But keeping things sharp and oiled, and I mean, I haven't oiled all this wood, but he would, every year, he'd go through and make sure everything's good. And when you put it, if you see these in the barn, in fact, I just saw one today, people hang them up just like this, and the weather changes, and they always break, they split right out. So when you get done, you loosen up the turnbuckle a little bit so there's room for expansion. Next morning, you tighten it back up. But most of them are broken that you see hanging around. Try to remember to loosen this one. If you loosen it too much, the stick of wood falls out, and you have to put that back in. And then, so you take that saw, you take an axe. Now this axe is one I use regular. I've used this axe since 1995. And I use it to chip dirt off the logs when I'm sawing. And it's just a sweetheart. I found this in the yard sale, and I just feel strong. The small axe is light, I feel like I could just whack and whack all day with that thing. And I don't keep it super sharp because I am knocking dirt off, so it wouldn't stay sharp anyway. But an axe is sharp and right. You have to be careful when you swing, it doesn't stick. If this shoulder isn't right, it'll stick in the tree and then get it back out easy. So the shoulder's got to be sharp, and once you've done it for 15 or 20 years, you can really make an axe work. I just got the axe has a nice flare, and this handle is probably too short for most people. Most axes I had were that long. My dad would use an axe that long, and I know it's had to be longer because they cut 4-foot wood, and there's a notch at 2 feet. So when they get the tree on the ground, and then you go whack, whack, make a mark, so they know where to cut it off. They would do it so quick when you do it all. I don't do that, so I'm a little clumsy at it. And this is a very boring head. You got the nice lines on that, and So I think if I was going to go into pulp business, cutting wood by hand, I would take this head and put it on this handle. because you get a little more, it gives you a little more leverage with a longer handle. So with that saw and this axe, that's all you need. You can cut trees down, you can cut the face with the axe, saw it from the backside, tree goes down, go through the axe, mark it, limit, go through and saw it. And you might want to get a PV. If you're doing big logs, you do a PV. Now, I started doing PVs mostly when I got the sawmill, 1995. I got my first sawmill. I hated it. I could not make that PV work. I swore at them things. Who the hell invented this thing anyway? And by the time 2 or 3 years went by, Ryder was there when we first got that mill. We had tractors in, but 2 or 3 years later, and one of my favorite tools. This isn't the one I usually use. I got one at home that's shiny. But you can move a 500-pound log without. Once you learn what to do, I did a program with the school kids. I think Sue was involved in it, and we had these 7th graders come, and we would have line up the log, and they had to roll it, turn it, and then roll it the other way until it hit pins. And the log is, like I said, 400 or 500 pounds. And the big burly guys got up there, like that, and show us an interaction with and all that. The girls would kind of stand back, and then little 90-pound girls, they'd be watching, and they would show their boys up. Because it doesn't take a lot of strength. You can be stupid, you can blow and jam and all that. But it was just really fun watching them learn how to make that all happen. So, wonderful tool.
What's the difference between a PV and a camera?
If I get this right. A PV, there's a guy named PV in Maine that invented this part, right?
It's the point.
The point.
There's no point on a camera?
Yeah, it's just flat.
You can't look at it, you can't.
Cant's at a mill, so usually it's square with a cant.
You got a little short one with that kind of head on
Yep.
the sawmill. But that's a can.
Already sawn it.
Right. Yeah. So you can't saw it again, but you already saw it. So the idea is you can turn it, get the log rolling, and at this point, and once it gets rolling, flat ground, old downhill, and just kind of keep jamming it along. And we can get it going pretty quickly if it's in the right situation. But the PV is a nice invention. You just know how to use it. What else we got? Oh, I wasn't sure to split. I split hundreds of cords with this axe. When I was a kid, it was kind of a job. My grandparents had a kitchen stove, and that stove ran 365 days a year. In July and August, they let it go out in the summertime in the afternoon. You get a 4:30 start fire every day. And in the afternoon, when it was hot, they let the fire go out. So there's a lot of little pieces. They would have chunks that big. And we'd go in the woods and look these big piles. We'd saw them on the saw rig. And when we had 2 places. We'd carpet a set of each other at 2 ends. If they're small enough, the only fire would go that way. And those guys saved every stick of wood they wanted. And if it was anything bigger than, well, anything bigger than that, we'd split it in half. And anything like that, we'd just split more than that. And so you get to a big pile of wood, and I used to really enjoy it, because that wood would pile right out. And people do it differently, but what we did, we had a chopping block. And if you study the block, which were 16 inches, most of them, and if you studied it, you could usually get it 1 hit, and it would split open. If not, you would take a second hit. And when you get good, you can hit it and get your hand away to catch it before it flies to one side. And then I would hold it. Whack, whack, I couldn't do it now. Whack, whack. Then you have a little pile of wood, and then you have to put the other one behind the ground. And it didn't happen every time, but that was the goal. And the ones that didn't split good, they had a chunk stove. You know? So the ones that didn't split good would go in a separate pile and would burn them in the chunk stove. The 4-foot wood was pretty much all that happened until I came. And kind of a wedge. And I chose this wedge for a reason. See, it's not flat across. Kind of slopes one side. And I can tell you exactly why that's that way. Anybody got any idea? Because you're left-handed. No, so when we put a head, this is the kind of model we use probably. And this is an oval, handled oval. And if you put the hammer on just a little bit crooked, because you kind of got to fix the top. And if you put it on a little bit crooked, it's not going to hit the wedge straight. So it hits it on an angle, and it makes your wedge go off to one side. But it also, if it's off a little bit, it only have to be off a little bit this way to make this way lock, because it's a bigger distance. And you can use them. I've used a lot of hammers like this that weren't hung right, and you learn to aim a little bit to the side because you know where it's going to hit. But then you get one that's straight and you miss it. So you have to split the wood small enough so you can lift it. And so you split those big chunks, the trees down, you get it cut out. And they had other kinds of saws for the big one. I never saw it, but during the 38 hurricane, when they cleaned up from that, they had a giant saw. You'd see them at the fairs, the one longer. And they would set that up to work, and then they'd go work on some other wood while that chunk was getting cut off. So they thought that was pretty nice. Joe Woodard. Anybody remember Joe Woodard? Oh, yeah. Joe Woodard came to our house after the hurricane. He lived in there then. And he lived there for 2 years. And he came to clean up from the hurricane. And that's where he met my aunt. She was in the area. So, but they got 300 cords of wood. There's no pictures, but I heard it from several people as a kid. They had long rows of 12-foot wood that ran down. It had to be just about useless after the hurricane. There was so much firewood around. And he, you know, my grandma talked about he'd be in the woods as long as he'd get there, walk up in the dark, walk home in the dark, every day, except Sunday. He would walk home late Saturday night, walk to Meriden, 25 miles, and be back Sunday night, ready to go again. And she said he'd sit in front of the stove after he got done, well, we saw, get everything all set for the next day. I couldn't do that. I need to go to town. That was an interesting time. So a hammer is a different kind or a different density of steel, I guess. They make the wedges soft, so your hammer doesn't wear out, and these always flare out while you're hitting them. And this is one I found that was probably 10 inches long at one point, and they kept pounding it until it got too short to use. Except, if you're doing frozen wood, these wedges will not go in. You can hold it on there and pound, you think you got it, hit it, it pops right back in. Kind of frustrating, but if you've got a little wedge, I had one that was even thinner than that. You can start it, get that wedge in there, and it kind of opens it up a little. So then this wedge will go in and it'll stay there, and it'll bounce back out. So even though that looks a little worn out, it's really just getting it is where it should be. Load all that wood on the wagon by hand, drive it down, probably with very hurricanes and horses. And the tractors are just 12 horsepower, with wood. Bring it down the house, pile it up, run it through the saw rig, zing, 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 split it in the wood shed, and on and on. Daisy brought this little taffy that her dad trained oxen on. It's a small, you open it. I don't know, do you remember him using it?
No, I don't remember. He told me.
Yeah.
That's-
About 7 inches. The major yoke by that distance between rows and rows. I remember hearing stories of his dad having oxen and
Yeah, he had a pair named Pip and Squeak.
That's in Sweet? Sweet.
And he told the story, my mother told me, one time that they were yoked together and they were in a small pasture near the house during the lunchtime. And and she saw them, they wanted to get out of the pasture. She saw them coordinate, they backed up a few steps and then ran toward the fence and together jumped over the fence.
I'm gonna go back to David because this was a question of Michael. That I've written one of these things. If you want to imagine, I've never run anything, but this was a grain side. Grain side? Yeah. So you would mow it and it would lay right in on that wood. This is kind of a beat up one that somebody's kind of fixed
Hold
out.
it up, please.
Hold
And
it up.
then you could
You
dump
want
it
to
and you leave it right.
Hold it up just so they can see it.
Isn't that a beauty?
Oh,
I don't think I want to let that in. And you couldn't do that when it was wet because you want it dry. No, they had to be out in the hot sun. And so when they cut it off, right at the ground, you'd end up with this nice little pile of oats, still on the stalk, laid down. And like Mike said, then you had your sister come along, and then you could take the straw, tie that together, and stand it up in the field. You've all seen pictures of that. But this is the tool. Oh, and we had a tool in there. Neither one had a handle, so I'm assuming there wasn't, I don't see any place where the handle would have fit. It's probably,
Well, I never got to use one.
I don't know. I'm glad it didn't help. Imagine that, I don't know. It brings me down. It's supposed to be
and then
like
the
that.
flail is connected.
Yeah, then once you get there, you tell us, Jerry.
I don't know exactly how to use, you know that.
Thank
You put it in the barn floor there.
Yeah.
You know, you have a hay on either side.
Stand up and,
But when in the winter, you take those sheaves that your sister tied
Yeah.
and lay them out on the,
Oh, I need your feet on.
in the middle of the barn there. And feed them until the cows came on.
So I think I'm not gonna do it here, but something like that. And this thing goes over. And the first few times on its back, it's right, handstand, and it's right out of the hands. It's one of those things you wanna learn pretty quick. I don't know which hand to use. I guess this is. Yeah, this thing goes. Trash and trash, dusty. Lila used to do that. And he blamed that on his back lawn. This is also amazing. I think
yeah,
this is
who
a
was,
grab.
somebody in the group was talking about using that for measuring fertilizer. Who was it?
Oh, I was just,
Yeah,
I just used it because I don't want to hang it in the kitchen. I wanted to weigh something, so it works really well.
Does it? Yeah. So I see this and I think of a loose up trap. Because you put a leg hole trap on this end and then hook that in the ground and come back and find a loose trap. I've done that. I did that as a kid and it is pretty. It's got a cool in it sometimes, and I think that was the last one I did. It's not very nice for animals. Because they'll chew their legs right off to get out of there. And this one has my babies hanging around. It was a bad day. So, this is a deed. This is not the original deed I thought it was. And Deanna straightened me out today that this is like the second, this was 1790, what was it, Dave?
She's outside.
She's gone. No. 1773. So this is 2 years after the original deed. So brothers bought land back when Paul Grant was explaining some of that, and I'm totally confused. We do have the original deed. Trying to get Deanna as our photographer. We're trying to get her to get out and make copies of them all so we can have them to look at, because they're pretty fragile. We don't open them up very often. So our time's about up, but I just want to talk about this farming. And we romance the hell out of this, you know? It just sounds so wonderful, all this wonderful tools, and everything's all pretty working good. Hard work. And these people shoveled, everything was shoveled in, everything shoveled out, the long days in the sun. And it was, I mean, I think it might have been a little easier when there were a lot of hired men around and needed help. But the owners would help if they had somebody else to be there at 2 o'clock in the morning, tending a sick cow. And you know you can start milking at 4:30, and there's a whole field of hay coming, and it's gonna rain in the afternoon, and, you know, very stressful time. And a lot of work. And they probably enjoyed most of it, but I am sure glad to be alive today. When I was a kid, we were shoveling the Lenore for 30 cows. And you shovel it, after school, we'd shovel it in the wheelbarrow, dump it. In the spring, we'd shovel it onto the spreader. By the time I came along, there was a spreader. Mike remembers the dump cart. Just shovel it onto the dump cart, drive it out the field, dump it, shovel it to spread it around the field. So I don't know how many times, but you just shovel. 30 cows who are willing to make a pile in order to fill this wrong. And you only got a little window to get the corn in. If the corn is not in by the 1st of June, you don't do it. So you got between mud season and when the corn has to be in to get that manure spread. A lot of work. And like I say, it's fun. And all our songs and our poems and all we make, it's fun. But it is nice that no kids do that anymore. Never happened.
Tell them how the Fitch family survived the Depression.
You know, they never knew it. My dad said they didn't, you know, they read it in the paper, but money was really an issue. You know, they sold a few things to pay taxes or something, but he said it didn't matter. They just kept doing what they were doing. They grew all their own food. They worked for the neighbors. You know, most of these New Yorkers had enough money to help them out. And he said it really didn't affect them at all. They just kept going. And that's the way it's been for 150 years. They grew everything they wanted, and they just had to have enough money to. But they had fun. They socialized. They went to parties and dances and social gatherings, and they, you know, once they got a car, they'd drive around the mountain on a Sunday afternoon and go to Windsor. They went to Windsor every day. They'd take milk over to Windsor. So that was time for somebody to go to Windsor with the milk in the morning, and they would hang out over there. Sometimes you meet somebody at the train and bring them home. But real social times were the 1800s, and I think as our families, as we came along, the 40s and 50s, it had changed. There was trying to milk more cows with old methods, and it's a real struggle.
So the women did me. And the grandma stayed home for like weeks.
Yep, never left the house. Yep, and never, you know, she wouldn't go. She knew we've got a spring that we still use in the house, in Gravity Peak Springs, and she was proud she knew where that spring was. It's, I don't know, a couple thousand feet from the house, and she'd never been beyond it. She'd never walked in the woods. She was home cooking, baking, raising kids. That's what she did. She would be 90 years old. Yeah. That was an interesting time in history. So the Fitch farm is going to continue. We've got another batch coming along here. So I kind of backing off in the shadows. We're trying to get down on cows, eventually be out on cows in 2 or 3 years. So we'll keep doing the garden and mowing lawns. We'll be there doing all that. As long as I keep cutting firewood during the end, I'll let me stay around. We hope to do a little more traveling, but they're taking things over. Gloria's going to tell you all about it.
All right, I'll try to keep this under an hour, just so you know. No, but in all seriousness, we love being on the farm. We have such a rich history, and we're just kind of honored to be able to carry on the tradition. Deanna and I and Hudson and Hayden are fast growing up, so they're able to help on the farm quite a bit. And we're really focusing just on homesteading, getting our cows and chickens, pigs, kind of the essentials, and a small garden. Just trying to be as self-sufficient as possible, and then be able to sell a little bit to the community and townspeople just to help out, pay the bills. So we're really just trying to focus on that, and then also just be good stewards of the land. So we're working with some Forresters. Leo was here. And so we're working with some Forresters to work in the East Woods to try to open that up a little bit and maintain the trails and just kind of keep the land accessible and open for everyone to use for more generations. We hope that we can make a place that Hudson and Haven will long stay and continue on the tradition. So yeah, I think that our end goal was to kind of just make it like an open, welcoming place where we can hold classes and painting sessions and just have
Tell them you're both artists.
Yeah, I was gonna say have the arts background that Deanna and I have, kind of working at the farm and kind of make a new angle and kind of put our own spin on things. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
What kind of cattle do you have?
We have Highlander cattle right now, but they're mostly under my dad's management, so we're kind of dwindling that down, and we're really just trying to go slow. We did chickens 1 year, and then we added pigs. So we're just trying to add a little bit at a time, so we can really manage it, really raise the animals right, and take care of the land like we should, and not try to go too big, too fast.
Are you working toward energy independence too?
Yeah, so we do have solar panels on our barn.
You do?
We do. We don't have batteries yet. So that would be kind of a next big energy independence thing. We would need to have batteries so that we could store our own energy, which would be great.
My family has been in farming for years in the Dakotas, but what they have found seems to be a secret is that they also have an income off the farm that supports the farming.
Yes.
So do you also have income from off the farm?
Yeah, so I currently work at the Hopkins Center up in Hanover.
Excellent.
I do web design, so I have government benefits for the family, which is nice. Deanna's a freelance photographer, so she picks up jobs doing that. So we have that kind of steady income to help pay for the farm, but we really are trying to get the pigs to pay for themselves and the cows to pay for themselves so that the farm can kind of just even itself out. Keep going.
This kind of leads to my question. So you're working full-time at the Hopkins Center.
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage a full-time job and the farm?
There's nights and weekends, right? But honestly, a lot of it I have to give credit to Deanna because she does so much. She does the daily chores, she did Hudson and Hayden helping out, she does all the bookkeeping. So she's really taken it on, which is great to see that ownership and see her. She's doing a really great job at it. So.
I just want to add.
Where the whole family is involved.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
It's the old tradition where the whole family is part of the enterprise.
I just want to add that Deanna's not a farm girl. She's picking this right up, watering every minute of it, and I watch her walk with Hudson in one hand, the stroller and the baby, and go out and feed the pigs, and come back to the chickens, and it's just really fun to watch it. She's a wonderful person. We're so glad she's got
Yeah, so we do invite anybody, our land is open, so feel free to wander. If you have any ideas for classes, yoga, painting, music, whatever, we have open space that we can host. So we're really just trying to make it more of an open community space.
Do you do anything with sheep and goats?
Probably not goats, I've heard they're kind of a pain.
Oh, yeah. They won't stay in there.
Yeah. So we're trying to assess what we really want to do, and so far, like the laying hens, the meat birds, and the pigs have been great for the last couple of years. We're probably going to get a milk cow or two is our next big step. We want some bees, kind of get the essentials that we use a lot, but they're not off the table, so.
Any interest in carrying on the wagon and sleigh
We'll see. It is a lot of fun, but
It's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work too, and I don't know if I could live up to the tradition.
It's
So,
all over here.
yeah, right. Go along with you, get a couple of but yeah, I think it's interesting. I think my dad wants to continue that, into retirement. Yeah. Any more questions? All right, well, yeah, we really appreciate